Joined now by Jeff Paterson of Rink-Wide Vancouver, our Canucks reporter with, let's face it, a busy couple weeks, Jeff. We're just sort of waiting for news, waiting for shoes to drop here on a number of fronts. Let's start with Philip Hronek, the big piece who unlocks much of the Canucks offseason. Do you think this is a long-term deal by the draft, or we're moving Philip Hronek proposition?
Yeah, I'm not so sure that I feel it's that dire. That I think the Canucks have some time here, that they know there are several options. None of them are particularly great financially for the Vancouver Canucks, in that Hronek's got most of the leverage here. And, if the Canucks can get some other deals done here, I think they can put Hronek on the back burner a little bit, knowing that ultimately he can take them to arbitration and he's got a strong case. And so I think they know they're going to take their lumps here, whether they get a deal done or not. I guess the question is, how much do they value this player? And I guess internally, if they come to a conclusion that, they don't value him the way that maybe we think they do, then perhaps we'll see a deal done to move him on. But look, they've been chasing a right shot defenseman that can play big minutes basically the entire time that I've covered this hockey club, which is a quarter of a century. And you can make a strong case that you can go the entire existence of the Vancouver Canucks, and it's an awfully short list of true right side top pairing guys that they've had in the fold. They gave up a lot to get him. I guess I'm just not convinced that they're going to be prepared to move off him, even at the price that he's going to command here.
So you think arbitration is an option then? You think the Canucks would be happy with doing the arbitration deal, basically kicking this can down the road, knowing you've got Hronek on a 1-year deal before UFA?
Yeah, I don't know that I want to be characterized as saying that I think they'd be happy with that, but I think that is an option. Now, we see, small percentage of arbitration cases that actually get before the arbitrator. So, one thing for a player to file for arbitration, that just buys them a little bit more time before, they can hammer out an agreement. But I just think anyway the Canucks look at this, they know that the arbitrator is going to side with the player here. He played huge minutes. He put up massive points. And these are, the counting statistics that the arbitrator uses. And just any way you slice it, it's going to fall in Hronek's direction. So, that's why I come back to this idea that, internally, if they don't think that he is a player long-term that can complement Quinn Hughes and can continue to eat these minutes, and if they think he's more the second half player than he was the first half player, then sure, maybe they've got their eyes on some sort of move here, and the draft is definitely a time when the ground is fertile for deals to be made in the National Hockey League. Although we always say that going into the draft, and far fewer deals actually transpire, but you usually get one or two significant trades in and around the draft. And look, they're not going to have anything else to do on the first day, so maybe they can be busy over at their table making phone calls and pestering other teams that are focused on actually getting involved in the first round of the draft. So, it's funny. As we sit here on this Monday, exactly 2 weeks from July 1st, like it's coming quickly, and we know that the last general manager in this city declared famously that he ran out of time. They still have time in their hands, but with the draft in those 2 weeks, and even though they don't have a first rounder, their attention is going to be elsewhere here. They've got a lot on their plate. Like, time is ticking here on the Vancouver Canucks. Quite frankly, I'm a little surprised that they haven't been able to take care of some of their internal business here to allow them to, just lessen the amount of work that they have to do over these next 14 days.
If there is an unreasonable line in the sand from the Hronek camp, for all the reasons you just talked about with regards to arbitration, this is a valuable player. If he's everything that, you guys just talked about there with regards to the huge points and the elusive right shot defenseman, he's also a guy that has a tremendous amount of value, especially because he is young. If there's somebody out there with a right shot defenseman that's aging and they're not in that cycle of contending for a cup right now, there might be a deal to be had if, again, the number begins with an 8 and they're unwilling to bend off that. And if the Vancouver Canucks just say we can't do that, there are options here. Like, I think they like the player, Jeff. Do you think they love the player? Like, absolutely can't live without him, like in an Elias Pettersson kind of sense?
Yeah, I don't think they're at that point with this player, but I do think one of the factors, guys, you have to keep in mind is his partner had a 92-point season.
Mhm.
I think you want to keep the captain happy. He is the driver of this organization. And not that he couldn't put up massive point totals with other players. We've seen him do that in years gone by, but he's coming off a career season and he was locked to Philip Hronek. And the numbers showed, like when they were out there, they were a legitimate dominant pair in terms of driving play and spending time in the offensive zone. And so it's not just Philip Hronek in isolation. It's the role that Philip Hronek had in boosting the superpowers of Quinn Hughes. And that is significant to the Vancouver Canucks. And so I think they have to be mindful of that. And again, could they go and try and find a replacement that could, find a rhythm with Quinn Hughes and allow Quinn Hughes? Like, Quinn Hughes is an incredible player. We know that on his own, but sometimes you're a product of the surroundings, and he and Hronek found something there that absolutely worked for them individually and for the team collectively here. So, it's never just one guy in isolation, but you're right. A 26-year-old right shot guy that came close to 50 points. And, this was a career high for Hronek, but it wasn't an anomaly. I mean, he's been a 40-point guy without playing full seasons in Detroit. So, I think he's realizing his potential here. And I know he didn't want to discuss it on that final day of the meetings, the exit meetings. He was hurt in the second half. That's an undeniable fact. It's been reported now. I saw with my own two eyes that arm was so heavily wrapped for practices. I would imagine it was that much, and then some probably for games as well. There was a reason we didn't see the big slap shot until Game 7 against the Edmonton Oilers, when I think he thought, like, I got nothing to save this for. I may as well just wind up and let it fly. And sure enough, he found the back of the net. So, there were factors and reasons why his production, at the very least, dipped in the second half. I think the Canucks have to be careful of separating the production from the performance. And, we get so focused in our business on goals and assists and ultimately the counting statistics. I think the Canucks have to take a long, hard look, and I'm sure they have, from every direction. Was it just his production that dropped in the second half, or did his performance dip in the second half? And there is a distinction to be made there.
Yeah. Ilya Mikheyev, Frank Saravelli had the news on Friday, Jeff, that the Canucks have been calling around looking to move Mikheyev for some time now, actually, since last season after the Zadorov trade at the deadline, and again, since the end of the season. Where are you at on that? Are you willing to retain some salary? Are you willing to pay a sweetener if it means moving Mikheyev and his salary out?
Yeah, I don't like either of those options, but I mean, that's where they are if they want to move the player in the contract. I mean, option 3 obviously is to bring him back. And I'm not convinced that we wouldn't see the best version of Ilya Mikheyev in his 3 seasons so far, this 4-year contract. Yeah, he got hurt in the preseason in his first year. We know that he played on a torn ligament, and obviously they had to shut him down. He didn't have last summer to train fully. And I just use Oliver Ekman-Larsson as an example of, you give a guy a full off season to train and do the work and put in the effort, and you can come back and be a player. And look, I don't love the contract at the time of the signing, didn't love the contract, but if you look at the underlying numbers with Ilya Mikheyev, like, defensively, he is still a legitimate National Hockey Leaguer. He doesn't hurt you in the defensive end. He doesn't help you offensively. And it is a little bit rich to have him in a bottom 6 position. I get that. But so many of these guys that, we've talked about the fact that so many of their penalty killers are on expiring contracts. I don't know if they have all those guys back. They didn't use him that much as a penalty killer. If he has a full summer, he can get some of that speed and that burst back. If he could take on penalty killing as one of his primary duties here, I think I could live with him for next season at that price point. And then maybe you get a player back that would attract a little bit more interest around the national. Either you get a player back that helps you, or the rest of the league isn't as wary of a guy that just came off a run of 1 goal in 61 games. Like, I can understand why teams are asking for some sort of sweetener here. You're just not trading that player straight up. There's just going to be no interest at his price point. So, of all the options, I do wonder if living with Ilya Mikheyev at 4.75 for next season could be palatable if you get a guy back that is closer to the player we saw in the first half of the season, he takes on some added responsibility, maybe late games, protecting leads, those types of things. Because, again, I think the defensive side of his game and his mind is still there. What does he look like with a full off season to train and come back and hopefully hit the ground running?
One more year gets you that much closer to a palatable buyout, too, if you do have to kick that can down the road as well. Your take on the poll question here, because everything went right health-wise and performance-wise for the Vancouver Canucks to give them the season that they had. In some ways, maybe you'd want to run it all back with most of the same players. Or you can just say, hey, that was a lot of planets aligning. We need to be better than we were. What do you think? Should they try to run it back? Will they try to run it back? Or do you think there's going to be a revamp of the roster?
I think in pro sports, change is inevitable. I don't think you're running it back entirely. It certainly sounds like a couple of guys at the very least have their foot out the door and want to explore free agency, and that's fine. That comes with the territory. Players work hard to get to this situation to set themselves up for the big payday, and if it can't come here, I'm not going to begrudge any of them for testing the market in that regard. Also, running it back, and it was a fun 2 rounds. It was a terrific 13 games. It re-energized the city and the fan base and the marketplace. But ultimately, it was 7 wins where 16 were needed. I mean, there are areas that they have to get better, without a doubt. Now, having a healthy Thatcher Demko, would that have changed things? Having a healthy Brock Besser for Game 7, might that have tipped the scales? Yeah, maybe we can play that game all offseason. But, if you take the broader approach, they need help up front scoring. I think we all know that. I think they recognize that. I think Rick Tocchet had a defense core sort of molded the way that he liked. And so I can understand the reasons for wanting to keep as much of that intact and running that part of it back. But, for me, and I've said this before, and I've written about it at Canucks Army, the most important thing to happen for the Vancouver Canucks this offseason is to get star level Elias Pettersson back. Because whatever else they do, whatever other money they devote, they are in for the long haul with this player, committed, the cap pick that goes up this offseason. They need him playing like a star. And if he does, there's a trickle-down effect. But the inverse is correct as well, that if he comes back and is not terribly engaged and looks like he did from the All-Star break and through the playoffs, there's a trickle-down there in that we're going to be wondering about the wingers and, who's going to get them the puck and help them create. So, I don't know that there's a whole lot the hockey club can do, and I'm sure whatever they can, they would. But so much of that is on Elias Pettersson to figure it out and come back and be in the right mindset and be, the best shape. Rick Tocchet has thrown down the gauntlet here, the challenge. I heard him recently talking about wanting Pettersson to be one of the top 3 players in terms of fitness level. that tells me that he's not in the top 3 right now, or at least he wasn't when he reported for last season. And so I think Rick Tocchet, has basically put the challenge at the feet of Elias Pettersson, and so much of the Vancouver Canucks success next season and the season beyond, it's going to flow through number 40. And what kind of Elias Pettersson do the Vancouver Canucks have moving forward?
The key transaction of the offseason, the acquisition of Elias Pettersson. Is that what you're saying?
Well, or the acquisition of a trainer for Elias Pettersson.
Whatever.
A big summer, of course. No, but Jeff's right. Quite frankly, you don't have the resources available to you this offseason to revamp the roster to a contender status. You have to rely on some of your internals to get to that next step. And Jeff's a 1,000,000% right that Pettersson being a star centerman is part of the equation. A healthy Philip Hronek is part of the equation, as well as is a healthy Thatcher Demko. So no, it's a very good shout, Jeff. Because they just don't have the cap space to be able to build upon what they have this year. And look, there's not a ton of internal improvement left. Like, I'm not sure how much better Quinn Hughes can get. I'm not sure JT Miller is getting better at this age of the game, but that's sort of the die that is cast for the Canucks for this coming season. At least we'll see a year from now when we're talking about this team and its roster. Jeff, does Guentzel at $9+ million entice you, or does a buy low potential trade on Patrick Laine entice you when we talk about that big gaping hole of scoring on the wing?
Yeah, Laine just doesn't feel like a fit to me for this organization, for Rick Tocchet particularly. I just can right now. I can feel that one kind of souring already and going sideways. And we've seen that wherever Laine's gone. That look, the talent's undeniable, and yet for whatever reason, just so much noise around him. And for a coach that demands the work boots are on and wall work and structure and system, I'm just not sure that Patrik Laine is the guy here. I think I'm ready for the Vancouver Canucks to take their best swing here in unrestricted free agency at Jake Guentzel. I mean, they've been linked to him. The history is there with the principals and the operators. So, I think that they are serious about taking a look here. Again, they need Elias Pettersson, but Elias Pettersson does need to be surrounded with better players. And certainly on this year's free agent front, I'm not sure that there is a better proven goal scorer than Jake Guentzel. So, that sounds like the big fish that's out there. It comes at a hefty cost. There's no doubt. And, Pettersson's contract kicks in. You got JT. This deal would be sort of in the middle between those two guys. We're not that far away. Obviously, Brock Besser's a year away from unrestricted free agency. Like, how many big contracts can you have? That's a question that they're going to have to answer even as the cap goes up here. And we've seen in other markets, if you go top heavy, you have to find efficiencies elsewhere. And that has held back certain other teams. So, that's a sort of a problem the Vancouver Canucks have to recognize. But yeah, rather than trying patchwork and hoping, and they did a nice job of it last year, like credit where it's due. And it's why Patrick Allvin was in the running for general manager of the year, and Rick Tocchet was able to, make the most out of the group that he had, and he's the coach of the year. But Besser had a career season. Nils Höglander had a career season. Some of those unrestricteds that they brought in had career seasons. You can't bank on that every single year. And even with a guy like Besser, I'm not convinced that Brock Besser is a 40-goal scorer for the next bunch of seasons.
Nope.
I do think that he's got to be a 30-goal season scorer. I think he's proven now he can get to 40, that 30 has to be his baseline. But, maybe he takes a step back. Maybe Nils Höglander takes a step back as well. And that's where you need some other guys to step in here and fill that gap just on the goal scoring front. And Jake Guentzel would certainly do that. So, in terms of capitalizing on a re-engaged fan base, if the Canucks swing for the fences and were to knock it out of the park on July 1st, landing Guentzel, I think that would get the attention of the rest of the hockey world, but it certainly would carry this buzz through the summer months into next season here in Vancouver. So let's see how it all plays out. If they don't retain some of these pending unrestricted free agents, they're going to have the money to spend, certainly. And then it's a question of, there's two sides here. You can make your best pitch for Guentzel. Guentzel may have his eyes on playing somewhere else. Their family situations. I don't know what he prioritizes. I know at one point there was a suggestion that he didn't want to come to Canada. I think that's kind of been refuted now. But ultimately, the player gets the final say, and wherever he goes, he's getting his money. I don't think we have to be worried about Jake Guentzel on free agent frenzy day. He's getting his money. It's just a question: can the Canucks, put together enough of a compelling case for him to join some people that he's familiar with, to have a prime situation on a team that looks like, the building blocks are here for them to take a step forward, and he would be a big part of that. But I would say to Canuck fans, I think people should be excited about the opportunity, but brace yourself that ultimately Jake Guentzel may decide to play somewhere else next season in the National Hockey League.
It's too bad that some of the young draft picks and prospects from a couple of years before Wielander and Lekkerimäki, like a Podkolzin, for instance, haven't had the traction. Because wouldn't that be nice right now to see, Podkolzin coming off an 18-19 no-goal season with more traction expected this coming season? Because they are close for Wielander and Lekkerimäki, but it's just not close enough that it can affect really what you're doing in this offseason, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think anytime you're trading as many first rounders as they have here in a short span, it is going to catch up to you. And I think we're at that point. And that's where, free agents and effective free agents and finding value in the free agent market. And they did a nice job of it last year. And that's what, this management group has earned the benefit of the doubt. I'm kind of excited to see what they do on July 1st and maybe even July 2nd and 3rd after some of the big fish come off the board. Can they extract some value out of free agency like they did with a guy like Pia Suter? And they waited a few weeks before they were able to land him last summer. But yeah, entry-level contracts are massive for teams that are taking on big salary commitments at the top of the roster, and that's where the Canucks are now. And so, we've spoken here recently about Podkolzin, and yeah, like I want to believe, but I just feel like this is such a massive year for him. 5 years removed from his draft at 23 now. Like if we're having this same conversation a year from now about Vasily Podkolzin and hoping that this is now the year at 24, at some point, you turn the page, and they're not there yet. But that's why I feel like this one is such a huge year. And then you look at Max Sasson and Aatu, and like I'm all for these guys getting an opportunity. Archie Baines earned that opportunity to get his feet wet in the National Hockey League, but he didn't really move the meter. He's not a difference maker. And where do you find difference makers? At the top of the draft. And so if you're peddling first rounders the way that the Canucks have here over the last 4 or 5 years, it is going to catch up to you. And that's sort of where I think they find themselves in the here and now.
Yeah, I caught your piece about Nils Oman on Canucks Army, and I think you're quite right. Like he's going to have to be the fourth line center next year unless Sasson or Ratu, and many believe, including Dave Hall at Canucks Army, that Ratu's better on the wing, unless one of those two guys can break through. Lastly, Jeff, for me on Zadorov, where's your sense on where this is going, and how big of a blow do you think Zadorov moving on would be to the Canucks? Not just the team on the ice, but sort of the culture and the dressing room and everything he brought there.
So this one feels to me like, I know we heard heading into the weekend that, last and final was coming and ultimatums and those types of things. And yet in my head, I sort of have this vision of Nikita Zadorov, standing at the doorway, waving to the Canucks saying, "That's it. Bye. I'm going. Watch me walk away." And meanwhile, the whole time, like mouthing, "I love you. Please. Like if there was a split, I feel like we would have seen the split happen now. And it feels like there's a deal there. We heard a couple of weeks back now, or I kind of lose track of the full timeline, but it wasn't that long ago that we heard that, he loved it here so much, he'd be willing to take a little bit of a haircut to stick around and stay. But what is that number? Knowing that he's probably going to get his number on the open market, but it certainly feels like from a family perspective, the fact that the way the fans reacted and embraced him, like this feels like the place that he wants to be. And I keep coming back to myself and wondering, if it has to start with a 5, and if that's the holdup, like can the Canucks, there was industry chatter that the Canucks had, gotten into the high 4s with Zadorov, and that wasn't enough. And I wonder if it's as simple as if they can get to a 5, and I don't think term's a massive issue. Like I think he obviously wants term as an unrestricted free agent, but I don't think the Canucks would have a huge issue going 5 or even 6 years with a player who, at 29, like I think he can continue to be the player that he has been, into his early 30s, even into his mid 30s. And, we saw a resurgence from Tyler Myers. We've seen Ian Cole play at a high level well into his 30s as well. I think as a sort of stay-at-home defenseman, although Zadorov loves to roam too, but, a big physical guy. I think he can do what he does and be successful at it well into his 30s. So I don't think the Canucks should have fear on term here. It is a question of dollars, and every penny matters in a salary cap world. And, I keep coming back to this idea in my head, at least, where does he slot on the depth chart? Because they've got Quinn Hughes and Carson Soucy on the left side. It looks like he'd be a third pairing guy, but by his usage in the playoffs, he certainly was more than a third pairing defenseman. And so he's a little bit of a tweener in that regard. $5 million a year for a guy that can give you 20 minutes of ice time and kill penalties and bring some swagger and some intimidation. Again, the premium you're paying, I think, is for the playoffs. It's not so much for the regular season with this player, but man, you'd love to have him on your side and not have to face him if you get into the postseason. So I'm not ready to shut the door here, and I don't think either side is. At least that's my read on this thing, is that they both want to get a deal done, but somebody's going to have to budge just a little bit, and we'll see if it happens.
Yep, wholeheartedly agree. The longest goodbye with Nikita Zadorov. Quite right, Jeff. Marvelous stuff, sir. Thank you for this, and we'll catch up next week.
All right. Bye.
Bye. See ya.
I'll talk to you.
Long. Farewell. Gonna miss you. Hey, everybody. If you're enjoying what you're seeing here, then follow along with Sekeres and Price on YouTube. I promise more content coming.
The kids call it subscribe on YouTube.
Well, how about liking it?
Do that as well. Smash it right now.